We're gathered here at the cradle of all innovation, Stanford University, where a lot of young companies have grown on to become big companies and scale businesses. And the question that we will be asking ourselves is, are we at the end of this long cycle of continuous technology-based innovation? Are we going to continue to see big companies? Are we in a phase of sort of more linear growth versus exponential growth? And what I mean by that is, are people working on Angry Birds for Facebook, or are they working on things that will be, 2 to the power of 30, change things for 1 billion people? And that's some of the questions I hope to get from this set of panelists today. And I look forward to a very engaging, energetic session, and we will also be taking questions from the audience as we go along here. Thank you. So with that, I'm going to have Daniel, Matt, Eden, and Corey each introduce themselves. And if you would each start by talking a little bit about yourselves and sort of what got you to this point, and a little less about your startups and what the startup does. I think the personal stories in these are much more interesting to get out first before we get into the technology part of it. Sure.
So my name is Daniel Gross. I'm the co-founder of a company called Greplin, and I'll tell you more of that at the end of the segment. I originally came out here through a program called Y Combinator, which some of you may know. They have a pretty interesting model where they invite folks who they think are interesting to come out to the Valley, specifically Palo Alto or Mountain View, live there for 3 months, and basically bootstrap or help you start your company. And I originally came from Israel to be in Y Combinator. And I was in the kind of class of people who got accepted to the program but had no clear idea what they were going to build. I had this list, I still do in my apartment, this like crumpled down piece of paper with like 90 ideas on it that I'm sure we all have. And I realized that now's, why not now? Just like go rip through them and try to start building them. So I was like literally one of those guys in this program who literally every other week or every other 2 weeks, I would have this new thing that I would be demoing out and launching and seeing what people thought about it, getting feedback and moving on and on. And that's how the incarnation of today's version of that called Greplin came to happen. Specifically, I was, throughout the program, this is kind of a weird secret story. Throughout the program, at the very end of it, there's this day called Demo Day, where you get a chance to stand up on stage in front of pretty much an audience like this, except filled with VCs, people who think that they're super smart, apparently, and and a lot of them are.
I was an entrepreneur before I was a VC, so it doesn't matter.
You've proven yourself. And you get to stand up on stage in front of everyone and showcase your idea. And I was in this really weird situation because I had this product that was quite compelling. It was making a bunch of money using Amazon's affiliate revenue scheme. And literally 48 hours before demo day, Amazon decides to shut down the stream of income that this product was getting. And I remember going over to Paul Graham, the fellow who runs Y Combinator, and I remember saying to him, here's my situation. And he said, it seems like you have three options. Your first option is you can pretty much just call it quits, not stand up, not go to demo day, maybe do next session, we'll figure something out. The second option that you have is you can lie and not tell everyone. They have this great graph of how much money you're making, but it's about to collapse, and just try not to mention that last part. The third option is you could come up with something new. And you can try to have something that would be a workable prototype within those 2 days. And I had, at the time, always wanted to build the product that I'm working on today, which I'm not allowed to really tell you much about. But I think it's pretty interesting. And I'd never really taken the opportunity to do it. So I decided why not, and I built up a fairly basic prototype in those 48 hours, got up on stage, demoed it, and the rest has pretty much been ablaze since. Back to what the product actually does, and I'll try to say this as quickly as possible. We build pretty much a search engine for all of your stuff online. You can imagine a lot of us use many different websites, the emails that we have on Gmail, the files that we have on Dropbox, the notes that we have on Evernote. Some people here might use Salesforce to keep track of their business contacts. And even answering a simple question like tonight, where is this event exactly, in which building in Stanford, is a complicated question for a growing number of people, because it's very well possible that the actual location of this event is in your calendar description on Google Calendar. It's possible that if you got invited to this event through Facebook, it's on a Facebook event description. It's also possible that someone sent it to you over email. And answering that question is currently a fairly complex one, especially to solve from your phone. And it shouldn't be. The same way where if I mention an article to you and I try to look up where I read it, I don't have to think about if I read it on CNN or if I read it on MSNBC. I can just go to Google and type in a query and get results. It would kind of make sense to have this for your own personal information, since it seems like the average person has a corpus not unlike the same size that the internet was back in the early 90s. So that's the product that we build. It's kind of like a search box for your online digital life. That's a little bit about me and how my product came to be and the company that I work at.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. Matt?
So personal story first, then the company. I'm from Canada, like most entrepreneurs in the Valley.
Celine Dion.
C100 FM. That's good. I'm from Halifax. And made my way to the other cradle of all innovation, Harvard. Boo. Boo.
No response.
No response. Right. First world problems. And had a great go there, got an engineering degree, left, went to Apple, spent 8 years at Apple, trapped waiting for my green card to come through. Didn't come through fast enough, so I went to China, lived in China for 2.5 years, ran Apple's business in the education segment in Beijing, came back, got a visa, got a green card, quit. The experience I had at Apple was to sit in the back of a lot of classrooms where schools had deployed thousands of laptops into the hands of students, where they sat idle because textbooks were sitting next to those laptops, and textbooks were familiar and reliable and didn't crash and didn't have passwords and had been around for 100 years. Why use a laptop? If a textbook worked well for me, it'll work well for my students. And it frustrated the hell out of me to sit at the back of those rooms and see this happening. And it became extremely excruciating to realize that the book was going nowhere, and that unless somebody reinvented that thing, we wouldn't get beyond the current state of education in Western society. So we started Inkling, and Inkling is reinventing not just the book, but reinventing publishing as a whole. We have a mission to essentially turn the entire model of publishing on its head, and we've made some huge strides toward that goal just in the last week with the launch of our latest product, Inkling Habitat, which is the world's first scalable publishing environment for interactive content. So go to inkling.com/habitat, and you'll wonder what all the buzzwords are, but it's pretty darn cool. So that's where we are. We're a team of about 80 people. We're 2 years old, and Sequoia-backed company, doing very well, but miles to go.
Thank you. Eden?
Hi, my name is Eden Full. I'm from Calgary, Canada. And so I guess my interest in science and building things started when I was actually 3. My dad's an artist, and he would bring home all of these, articles and newspaper clippings of people doing different things. And what really resonated with me was people who built stuff, like space shuttles or, computers or things that actually had an impact on other people. And so I feel like I grew up with this interest in science and technology and was just looking for a way to apply it. When I was 10, I built my first solar car, and that was kind of when I fell in love with the whole idea of solar and renewable energy. And so as I worked more with solar, I realized that there's this problem with just the way solar is currently done. We have the existing infrastructure to build solar. A lot of people are deploying panels, and they're just lying there flat on the ground or flat on someone's roof or something. And they're not being optimized for all times during the day. And this makes sense because existing systems that can rotate these solar panels, well, they aren't very cost effective. And so what we need to do is develop a tracking system that's cheap enough that you can deploy it and it would be economically feasible for, say, a residential system or a system in a village in the middle of Kenya. And so, I did this in high school, and then, I went to Princeton for 2 years. After my freshman year, one of my professors found out about my work and was like, hey, if you go to Kenya for me and do all of my work, I'll fund your research secretly. So then this way I wouldn't have to tie it to Princeton. And so, I went to Kenya that summer, deployed my first 2 prototypes for this passive tracking system that I developed, and that was when I really realized that developing countries was, a viable emerging market that I wanted to work in and that I was personally interested in. And I feel like in my experience so far, it might actually be easier to deploy sun saluters in developing countries because there's less existing infrastructure and there aren't as many policies on how to install these systems. And so we're currently going to be launching 2 more pilot projects, one in Peru, hopefully in April, and another one in southern India somewhere in June. So we're figuring that out.
Thank you. Corey?
So I have sort of a long and circuitous story for how I got to be here tonight that actually involves VLabs specifically. I didn't grow up very far away from here. I grew up in Sunnyvale and Cupertino. I went to Homestead High School, and I went to Berkeley for college. And when I was in college as a freshman, I started a biotech company with some engineers that ran a pharmaceutical company here in Silicon Valley. And I was always excited by chasing big ideas and thought that biotech was going to be a big deal back in 2003 when I started the company. And I had an intern who worked for me who was a senior at Homestead High School. And I said, hey, there's this thing called VLab. I went to it when I was in high school. They have these great panels with entrepreneurs and a bunch of fantastic attendees that work in industry in the categories that they're talking about. There's this panel on biotechnology. You should go check it out and see if there might be anybody in the audience who could be a potential customer of ours. We're building these automated robots to do high throughput screening, really rapid analysis of genomic code. And so my intern, Boyan, he went out here to the VLab event, and he met somebody who ran a venture capital trade association called the Venture Capital Angel Roundtable. And she said, oh my gosh, there's a high school student here in the audience. That's crazy. Tell me a little bit more about this. And so I got connected to the woman who ran this group. Her name's Gloria Gunther. And I was asked to go and attend one of her Venture Capital Roundtable Association meetings. And when I was in high school, I was very involved in a business organization called Future Business Leaders of America, and did a bunch of business plan competitions. And Gloria said, well, hey, you know about business plan competitions? We want to start a business plan competition where we have our members who are venture capitalists and angel investors mentor Bay Area high school students. Would you help us organize that? And I said, wow, that sounds wonderful. I was a freshman in college at the time, getting my biotech startup up and running. So I started working with this trade association to organize a business plan competition for high school students. And that was great. I spent 4 years doing that. And along the way, I went to a bunch of conferences and events to represent the Venture Capital Angel Roundtable, and went to this conference out in Salt Lake City called the University Private Equity Summit. And it was a group of about 10 universities that had venture capital funds on campus. There was a fund at the University of Utah called University Ventures. About 40 undergraduate students were investing a $25 million fund. And I realized at the time there was nothing like this at Berkeley. So I thought, hey, it would be really interesting to start a student-led initiative to invest in technology companies coming out of universities. If you look at the history of the venture capital industry, some of the greatest companies have been started by people who got to know each other while they were spending time at a very specific set of universities. So I organized a group of students at my college, Berkeley, and we had some friends at Stanford and some other friends at Harvard and some other friends at MIT. So by my senior year, I had a group of 30 friends of mine that were working on sourcing venture capital deals out of universities and working with a handful of venture capital funds that we'd known to do due diligence on their deals. Again, this was all started because a person who had been interning for me was at a VLab event. And my senior year in college, I got introduced to 2 people who had just founded a venture capital fund of their own called Alsop Louis Partners. It was a $75 million fund run by a guy named Stuart Alsop and another guy named Gilman Louis. And they said, hey, we actually have as a part of our strategy to invest in young entrepreneurs coming out of the university ecosystem. Would you like to join us? And I thought, wow, these guys sound like fantastic mentors. This could be a great opportunity for me to learn the venture business and then to go on and become an entrepreneur. So my senior year in college, I joined Stewart and Gilman in their venture capital fund, and I started investing out of that fund. I invested in 3 or 4 companies in their first fund and spent 2 years with them learning the venture business. They were great mentors. And while I was there, I learned a bunch of things from both Stewart and Gilman. And one of the things that Gilman had done when he was, before he started his venture fund, was to create a venture capital fund for the Central Intelligence Agency called In-Q-Tel. And we got to talking back in 2009 and said, well, hey, you know, the defense agencies built all these technologies that are really good at understanding unstructured data streams, things like cell phone conversations, text messages, and emails. And, you know, they can find bad guys talking about doing bad stuff. But as consumers, we don't really get to take advantage of all of this fancy technology. What if we built out a data analytics platform similar to the stuff that the agencies use to help find bad guys talking about doing bad stuff, and we put it in the pockets of every consumer in the world with a smartphone and use it instead of to help find bad guys doing bad stuff, help consumers make better decisions and more informed choices as they're going about their daily lives, planning how to spend their time and how to spend their money. So Gilman and I started putting together the thesis for what has now become Nest Computing, a personalized search engine that you can connect to your social graph. You can follow your friends on it. You can tell it a little bit about your personal preferences. It learns what you like and what you don't like and reflects that back at you. We put together a founding team of some folks. One of my co-founders, Paul, he's here. He was also from Stanford with backgrounds in things like machine learning, natural language processing, big data analysis. And that was about 2 years ago. Allsop Louis Partners, where I had worked, became our seed investor. And thus I began my career as an entrepreneur. And I came back here tonight because B-Lab is really a wonderful place and got me help get started in my entrepreneurial career. And I think it's just a great place to meet people and to help get to know the next generation of entrepreneurs. So I'm really pleased to be here tonight.
So thank you, Corey. So on that note, to each of you, and maybe this may or may not apply to Eden, I don't know whether you have a co-founder, but each of you, how did you go about the process of finding and picking your co-founders when you decided this was the vision you were going to pursue and try to go execute as a business? And maybe I'll start with Matt, and then we'll just sort of mix it up, and then Eden, tell me, I have a different question for you.
So my co-founders happened to me. We had known each other. The one guy I went to YMCA camp with when I was 15. Yeah, they have YMCA camp in Canada too. And the other guy I met when I was a sophomore at the other Cradle of All Innovation. And I don't know if people are getting that joke because you said Cradle of All Innovation was Stanford, so I'm just going to keep harping on it. But we met. We'd known each other for quite some time. And when I left Apple to start the company, when they found out, one co-founder dropped out of his PhD program at Princeton, the other dropped out of his master's program at the Imperial College of London, and just showed up and said, you know, I thought we had agreed since we were teenagers that we were going to do this company together. And I said, well, that's awesome. Let's do it. So we ended up being 3 co-founders in the company because it was destiny.
So it was destiny, but it was also trust and having grown up together.
Yeah. I mean, there's real. If you go down the list, it's like we had a high channel of communication. There was immediate trust. There was shared values, right? Like there's this huge bit about don't start a company with somebody you don't know, because if you don't share a common value system on what's important and what you're in it for, then it won't work. And I don't know that I knew that at the time. In hindsight, it's easy to say. But.
Right. So on that point, I'm going to now turn to Daniel and ask the question. At Y Combinator, several of the companies are started by people that are meeting each other there for the first time.
Yeah.
So is it one size fits all, like the sort of, know each other from high school, kind of went to college together and then start a company, which is quite typical. I agree with Matt there. But there are other ways to do it, and you seem to have come from that school of thought. So tell me about how you ended up with your co-founders.
So the way I met my co-founder, Robbie, was effectively through Y Combinator. To pick up on that not-so-short story, after I'd kind of shown off the product to some investors, I started building an actual version, workable version of it during the night and fundraising during the day, and I kept on having this distinct feeling of like, I was building a search engine effectively, and I needed more than just myself. I needed someone with a real strong background in computer science. And I again went back to Paul Graham's house, and I told him this problem that I had. And Y Combinator actually introduced me to my co-founder. And the very, very short bio on Robbie's story is that he had done Y Combinator in 2007. And his startup was very, very quickly acquired by Google, where he spent 3 years working on a bunch of different teams. And he was kind of tired of the really, really fatty but good food, and he wanted to try something new. And I guess an interesting anecdote is we took a risk, to your point, Matt. We didn't know each other very well. We spent some time, working together before he took the leap. And we took a risk, and I think we're both very thankful to the fact that it worked out, and there's a lot of trust in the relationship that's evolved as the company has evolved. So, I mean, clearly there's an advantage to starting a company with people you already know, because you're not taking a bet, or you're taking a lesser bet. And I think everyone here on stage will tell you that running a company requires a lot of emotional stability, and requires your relationship to have a lot of emotional stability. And it's important that you don't waste time on, non-important conversations that don't really matter in the long run. I happened to get that, I think, like mostly by chance, and by, after spending 2 hours with someone, you kind of get an initial feeling of like, are you ready to spend 20 hours a day with this person? But you could very well be wrong. So it's not necessarily one size fits all, but going the route I took definitely incurs more risk. And it worked out, and we ended up bringing on a great team and raising a Series A from Sequoia, but it could have also gone horribly wrong. So in many ways, we're effectively thankful to Y Combinator for being a very good matchmaker.
So Eden, how did it come about that you decided to apply to be a Thiel Fellow?
Oh, well,
And what did your parents think of you leaving after 2 years at Princeton, when the admit rate at Princeton is, I think, 7% for the incoming undergrad class? I don't know what the numbers are, but I think it's roughly there.
Yeah. Well, I think after I got back from Kenya, I thought that really was the trip that changed my life. I started realizing that anything that I was developing in a lab, or in my spare time or in my basement, like that doesn't really mean anything if no one else is using it. So throughout my entire sophomore year at Princeton, I felt very unsatisfied and unsettled, as if I felt like there was something else that I should have been doing instead of being in class. So someone actually at Princeton forwarded this email to me, because someone at Clarium actually was a Princeton alum, and so through these listservs I found out about the Thiel Fellowship, and I felt like reading through the description, it really resonated with me at the time that maybe I didn't need college right now to succeed, and that's arguable, I feel like, but at the moment I felt like it was a good opportunity for me to just apply, see what would happen. You have to write 2 essays and submit your SAT scores and stuff like that, and then there's an interview process, and then you get selected. So I'm one of 24 Thiel Fellows under the age of 20 who have been selected to either stop out of college or defer enrollment to college or drop out of college, and do whatever we want for 2 years. And so, I think this is the best thing to have ever happened to me. It gave me the freedom to finally pursue my passion full time and explore who I am and try and figure out, what I actually want to be doing. But, I do plan on going back to Princeton when the Thiel Fellowship is over. And I promised my parents this. Both my parents didn't have a chance to go to college, so having a kid who went to an Ivy League institution is quite important to them. And I respect that. And, I think college should happen at different times for different people. So I think I need the last 2 years at Princeton at some point in my life, and I'd like to go back and get them.
That's great. That's a wonderful story. So Corey, you teamed up with a Stanford student. So you're from Berkeley. I'm wondering if you would. No, there's no joke in this question, other than I think, does it help to have people with different pedigrees? Maybe not Harvard. Does it help to have people with different pedigrees in a startup team that actually helps you bring in different perspectives, so that you could sort of balance off of each other and really this is a question for all of the panelists, but I think it sort of helps level set when you feel strongly about a certain direction in the product or the service that you're about to bring out, and the other person says, well, no, but that doesn't make sense. We should do it this way. So explain to me how that was helpful.
So I think I'll take a slight step back to the way in which I met my co-founders, and it was kind of from a different place. I'm not a technologist myself. I'm not a software engineer, but I wanted to start a search engine. I wanted to build a very complicated piece of technology. I couldn't do that on my own, and so I realized from day one, well, I have to have people to help me with this mission. And one of the things I'd actually learned at a talk here at Stanford, it may have been VLab or another event, given by Vinod Khosla, who's now an investor in Ness. When he gave a talk about entrepreneurship, he said that he has a philosophy on how to build a company and an organization. He calls it gene pool engineering. If you want to go and build a company in a given market or industry, you assess other companies that have gone and addressed key risks in that industry. And then you look inside those companies or those organizations and you identify people who have backgrounds and skill sets in mitigating those key risks. And so when you want to start a search company or whatever kind of company you want to start, you sit down and you look at, well, what are the foundational ingredients for the types of people that you'd have to have in that organization? And I quickly realized, well, you need to have somebody with a background in information retrieval, with a background in systems engineering. So I kind of mapped out the areas in which we needed help, and it turned out that my job as an associate at Alsop Partners let me spend a lot of time on campuses. So I was out at Berkeley sponsoring an all-night hackathon. It was a programming competition, and I actually developed relationships with two of my co-founders through this event. One of my co-founders, Stephen, was an undergraduate at Berkeley at the time. He won the hackathon, and it turned out that he'd won 8 of these hackathons, and so he was sort of the top software engineer in the undergraduate program at Berkeley at the time. And my other co-founder, Paul, who's here tonight, he was sponsoring the hackathon as well, trying to recruit engineers. He was currently working for Palantir, and so he gave a very rousing pitch for how Palantir had done some interesting geospatial search technology. And I thought, gosh, Paul seems like a really bright guy and might be able to help me with some of these problems. So I went out and got to know Paul, spent some time with him, developed that conversation and relationship. And going to the point of having different viewpoints around the table when building a company, I think it's almost absolutely necessary as you grow your organization that you recruit and build into your DNA people that have a different set of experiences and biases than you do as a founder. It was very acute for me because I couldn't write the code to build the thing that I wanted to build myself. But as you grow and scale an organization, when you have to think about things that are outside of your wheelhouse, like marketing or business development or whatever it is, it can be very helpful to go and map out other organizations and other people that have the skill sets that you're looking to acquire and have laser-like a focus on recruiting that type of individual to your organization to help you scale.
Excellent. Thank you. So I think it would be useful, since each of you is trying to solve a need for 1 billion people. Ultimately, scale is what you're after, I think, in your businesses. How do you think about scale? How do you go after scale? Do you think about it in terms of a time horizon? Do you think about it with a cost target? Do you think about it in terms of how best the end beneficiary is getting the service that you're going to offer? So I think it would be useful for the audience and for all of us to understand exactly how you wrap your head around the scale issues of your business, especially, and not even thinking about competitors, but just thinking holistically about scale, for scale's sake. Daniel?
Do I start? Okay. I'm assuming this is very much going to be on a business-to-business question, although there might be, I guess, some overarching themes. For us, scale means a bunch of different things. As a product, we're one that's really only valuable if you use it every single day of your life. That's really what we're shooting for. We're shooting to become that extra tab that you keep open in your browser, that app that you have at the bottom ring on your iPhone. And achieving that, to me, is effectively very similar, or if not the same exact question, as how do you achieve scale? And there's a lot of factors that boil into how do you build consumer habits around your product. So something we try to think about a lot is, as humans, we've all kind of learned that, the first 15 seconds of an interaction with someone is really all you need. And you've kind of made your initial judgments. You guys have all decided something about me, literally based on the first 15 seconds of when you've seen my face. Hopefully good, although if it's bad, I'm sorry, I can't fix it. And turns out a lot of this follows through when you look at a product. So when you download a new app from the App Store, literally the first few moments that someone has with your app are effectively going to decide and make or break it if someone uses your app every day or if it's in that category of things that they use once a month. So getting better at those first few seconds is not something we originally understood was really important, but now we literally treat it as the holy grail of the app. Literally getting interface decisions made for those first few moments of the app use, especially for the things we're working on today, is something that we don't take lightly at all. The other half of the skill for us is we make money through a freemium model. So the cost of a free rider or a free user has to basically be compensated by what we're getting our paid users to pay us. So now it becomes tremendously important that users effectively, especially the free ones, don't cost you a lot of money. And traditionally, the way many problems are solved with search, especially the speed problems, is you dump everything into memory. And without getting too technical, that basically means that a free user will cost you a lot of money because you have to permanently store their index in memory, which on a per megabyte basis is a more expensive operation than storing it on a hard drive. We had to develop quite a large amount of nifty technology that would let us store users' information cheaply and handle correctly a user who doesn't log in for 6 months and make sure that we're managing their data efficiently so that we're not caught paying too much for the free user who's not paying us at scale. And we've always tried to make sure that those numbers work with the infrastructure decisions that we make. So I guess those are two facets on how we think of scale, both in terms of the product and in terms of the actual infrastructure.
Got it. Matt?
So we have a really tough business in this bucket in particular. So I've learned, I think in hindsight, I've learned a couple of things. One is that if people tell you, or if the great criticism that your competitors or others have of you is that they'll never scale it, then two things are true. One, you're solving a very meaningful problem. And two, if you can scale it, you're going to get rich. And the notion of scale in our business isn't about the daily users, because we don't need people to be daily users in our business. We need them to be weekly or monthly users, where they come in and they consume really great content. The problem is that we've got to build a ton of that content, and there are shortcuts you can take to having content. You can copy stuff from a book onto an iPad and call it an ebook. Ta-da! Everybody's got the same thing, and it's not very innovative. But hey, Amazon and Apple are totally barking up that tree and making a bunch of money at it. It is not the future of publishing. And so you reinvent the work product and you think about really difficult, complex problems. And fundamentally, at least three of us, and you might even argue in favor of being the fourth case up here, is that scale problems tend to involve messy biological processes, mostly humans. So natural language is a really messy thing. It's terrible to parse. The brain is an amazing device at parsing the audio that you're hearing from my mouth right now and understanding it. Computers suck at that. It's even harder to try and scale the synthesis of human language, where you're creating new ideas. Computers are terrible at creating new ideas. And that's fundamentally the problem that we're in, which is how do we create great interactive content experiences at scale? I could talk for hours about how we solve that problem, and like many things, it's super complicated and has a lot of moving parts. But for us, scale is not just customer scale, it's also product scale, and fundamentally solves for really messy human biology problems, in our case, in natural language, and I think in theirs too. That's my perspective on it. It's not very useful, I suppose, because I could sit here and do a product demo. It would be more useful, but it's a big piece of what we do.
Corey?
So I think I'll riff off that a little bit. One of the ways that we can achieve scale in our business is by going and rolling up our sleeves and solving those really gnarly technical problems associated with natural language processing. So it turns out that the state-of-the-art systems to do entity extraction, sentiment analysis, English to other language translation can actually perform pretty well. You can get above 95% performance in big companies like the current search engines of today, and in defense and other industries. And so we actually want to go and scale some of the pieces of our technology against open platforms like Facebook and Twitter, where you can process large, meaningful bits of their information streams to say, well, we understand the language that people are using, so we can build a profile of a consumer and their friends and understand the preferences and anti-preferences of millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of people. That's technology That's scaling in a technological sense. But in terms of an organization and a company and a startup, scale happens in a very different way. As a company that's building web-based software, you can think about scale technically. But when you're an entrepreneur and you're starting a company and it's just you, or it's just you and a couple of guys, I tend to think about scale as a way in which you spend time. And I think that there are a couple of simple things that you can think about, and mantras almost. Act small, dream big, and say no a lot. If you say yes to everything, if you try to do too many things, you probably won't achieve the scale that you want to. If you look at what Facebook did, this is really indicative of it. They launched a product and it was great. It was a fantastic social network, but you could only get it at Harvard. And then you could only get it at 3 other schools or 6 other schools, and they went from there. So when we think about scale, it's all of the stuff that we say no to. It's obsessing about the details of a product. We could go broad and try to power personal search for all different categories of local and mobile commerce, but instead we say, no, we want to focus on a very narrow vertical. Right now for us, that's dining. And we want to expand bit by bit once we've won the trust and confidence of consumers. Ultimately, we want to power all sorts of mobile commerce experiences, but we have to say no to those opportunities and really obsess about the details for a very narrowly defined case. And if we do that, we can then achieve scale by the customer voting with their preference.
So Eden, in your case, did you, before you decided on this renewable energy opportunity in the developing world using solar panels, did you do any prototyping, which is, will people consume this? What are the practical issues of putting these sort of tower-based devices, even though it's without motors and it's a lot simpler and it sort of goes perpendicular to the sun and moves around? All of that is very, very nifty in terms of the idea. But did you have to worry about some practical issues on the ground, and how did you think about those as you were developing the concept, the ideation process?
Well, I'll be really honest. When I first got into this, I was just thinking about how I was frustrated with solar. I was frustrated that my panels weren't generating enough electricity for my projects, and that was where my frustration started. And I don't think I did serious market research until I actually got on the ground in Kenya. And how it worked was I spent the first 2 weeks just visiting this pilot site, really getting to know the people and earning their trust. And I remember one really big moment for me was I remember the first time I visited the village. It's called Impala. It's about a 5-hour drive away from Nairobi. I visited this village, and there was this woman who showed me she had 3 solar lanterns. She bought them. It was part of a kit, and it comes with 1 solar panel. And she told me that, it says on the box that this 1 solar panel, if you stick it out in the sunlight, it's supposed to power all 3 of these lanterns, but really it only fully charges 2, and the third one just gets kind of left out. And so I was like, well, this is a really obvious application of the technology that I've just developed. And I got really excited. So I went back to Nairobi and bought all the materials I needed. And so one of my goals was to try and construct this technology locally. And so going back to scale, I really believe that if something is to be truly disruptive, I should be able to construct it locally. And so I was going to build the frames out of bamboo, and I found some bimetallic coils at some random shop in Nairobi, and and I imported some parts with me, but most of everything I bought was on the ground. And I went back into the village a couple days later after I bought all of these things, because I wanted to ask her more questions about where she installed her panels and how she was using them. And when I went to find her, she wasn't there anymore. And I think this really impacted me emotionally. It turns out that she'd been trampled by a buffalo because she went out into the dark and didn't have a solar lantern, but needed to find firewood so she could cook, right? So this is a very direct example of how the lack of solar energy is impacting people's lives. And so that, I feel like, was the big moment for me when I realized that, yeah, it's not obvious that solar panel optimization is an important part of the solar industry right now, but as we think about it, the infrastructure to optimize solar energy is already there. We just need to make sure that you're getting as much juice out of all of those panels at all times during the day that you can. And so for me, I feel like it wasn't until it was like I mentioned before, that trip to Kenya really changed everything for me. And it was when I seriously started thinking about the market and where I was going to start deploying. And so thinking about scale, this is why I think it's important to start in developing countries, because there is a need for this. There's over 2 million solar panels that are deployed in developing countries right now, and they're just, a lot of that potential is just being wasted because it's not tracked. And so if I can build these trackers for cheap enough, which I can, I built the prototype in Kenya for about $10. That's very possible, and I think that's a market that a lot of people are overlooking right now, and I'd like to help address.
Great, wonderful. For the three digital guys on the panel, two of which are boldly going after search, might I ask the question of customer acquisition? How do you go about acquiring customers? And could you share with us at least a couple of things that you're comfortable sharing as it relates to new and innovative ways in which you think of customer acquisition? Clearly meaning lower cost, higher speed, higher rate of acquisition.
Me again? Okay.
Well, we can start with Matt, and then we can go to the two of you.
Customer acquisition for us is a very interesting thing. I mean, there's this joke that's always made by folks who are in traditional business models where customers buy stuff from you that, we have this newfangled business model where customers pay. That's not very funny, and I'm glad nobody laughed, because it's actually the vast majority of businesses in the world that when a customer comes to your doorstep, if they want something from you, they give you money. For us, we think a lot about how we build. We call it distribution. We use the term distribution. We use it more than we use the term customer acquisition, because we think about building an engine where we can bring customers to the doorsteps of content providers. And so, one very specific. We have all kinds of things that we're doing that are going to be quite interesting to the world. I think the most sort of low-tech, interesting thing that we do today that everybody in this room can easily grok is that we take this great platform that we have. We have a transactional engine on the web, and people can come in and buy content from us, and it just flips a bit, and it's available for them on their iPad, and we didn't have to go through Apple's 30% paywall. But we then dangle some of our market-leading titles out into the app stores in various forms that drives traffic into our platform. And people acquire content that is branded as the brand that they're looking for, but then give us their personal information. They kind of know it, but they don't really think much about it. And when they hand their personal information to us, we give them incentives to then join the community inside the platform. Because Apple, as many of you know, likes to very tightly control the flow of information out of their ecosystem. And we've found ways to sort of agglomerate information from consumers who are looking for a certain thing and then cross-market to them and bring them into the Inkling family as a customer of ours rather than a customer of Apple's. There are a lot of much more sophisticated ways that we're doing it, but one way that we're sort of making it work today is by going to where people are, giving them a really sweet candy, and then bringing them into the ecosystem to play ball with Inkling instead of playing ball with Apple.
And that brings up a good question. As you talk about customer acquisition, we live in a world of new toll takers on the internet. These are traffic aggregators, really. You've got iTunes and their 30%, Facebook and their 30%. You've got Amazon and their interesting ways of trying to generate revenue off of your customer acquisition. So as you talk through this and as you navigate to trying to get to customer acquisition with some degree of cost discipline, talk to this. And I'm now looking to you, Daniel, because you're going to have to deal with Facebook as you scale up.
Yeah. I mean, as well as we currently deal with Apple, we have an app on the App Store, and you can upgrade either from the website or from the app itself. And clearly, I'd prefer you to upgrade from the website because we'll get 30% less if you upgrade from the app itself. Back, though, I guess to the original question. An interesting thing about distribution for us is when our app works well, it's frequently used in social settings, meaning, I might use Grepplin to find out directions to my meeting with you, and when we really score on the presentation of that information, you might get so excited by the fact that, you just saved yourself 5 or 15 seconds, they'll tell the other person about it. So we have this really nifty, and we didn't frankly think about this originally when we built the app, just by virtue of looking at numbers, we had this really nifty kind of organic spread, which is, when you build a really delightful experience to someone that led them to effectively saving time in their life, and, now I can meet with you for an extra 10 seconds because I saved 10 seconds finding the information of what number to call you at when I was running late. That's something that encourages people to tell others about our app. We also, for the most part, see a lot of distribution just from the iTunes Store itself. So, what's really interesting about Apple as a whole is that you're put in this world where if you start to take off in it, you're kind of contained inside of this little bucket almost, and you can kind of effectively implode. So, like, if many people register for your product on your website, no one else in the world sees that. That doesn't go up or down anywhere else. If many people download your app, other people who browse the productivity section of the App Store start seeing that as well. So that's like an additional, I guess, to fall back to your later comment. Clearly, a downside towards these new toll bearers is that they take a lot of your revenue away from you. An upside to it is they provide, in many ways, a lot of the customers for you. Another really interesting thing about working on someone's ecosystem rather than just flat out charging for credit cards on your own is conversion rates are better because the mental frictional cost of upgrading is significantly lowered. The cost of taking out a credit card out of your wallet, which might even mean that you have to get up for half a second to pull it out of your pants, and mentally agreeing with yourself that the website won't steal your information, filling out your credit card info, getting the expiration date wrong, trying it a second time, hitting submit is really, really high. And the fact that you can just open up an iOS app and just instantly when there's that, you just want it for us. We charge based on the service you add, so you just wanted to add, for example, a Salesforce account, and the fact that all you have to do now is tap on a button and suddenly magically your cell phone, your credit card got hit, and we got that revenue, leads to better conversion rates. So if you do the math, it almost works out to be better, actually, to be on these people's platforms because as a result of having this situation where folks don't have to fill in any scary info, and they have a very low sort of almost like Amazon's one-click buy purchase, you end up seeing more customers as a result. Specifically to Facebook, we currently aren't in a situation where we ask people for credits. So we don't face their toll. That may be in our future. That will be a problem that will be just a hill that we have to climb. So far, though, it's actually been good for us to have a lower kind of transactional cost to users upgrading, just by sheer virtues of how the numbers look.
Cool. Corey?
Well, I would echo a lot of what Daniel said, actually. I think, you made a comment about user experience and the importance of that. I'd say that as an entrepreneur, somebody building a product, particularly one in the mobile ecosystem, particularly one on iOS, the best experiences there rise to the top. And if you obsess about making a product that has the right attention to detail paid to it, when people download that app, they want to go and show it to their friend and say, well, hey, look at this cool new thing that I got. You'll find that your customers can become your best evangelists and your best source of distributing and spreading your product. And in our case, we've really chosen to optimize for that and to focus on building that really delightful and wonderful experience right from the first time a consumer tries our application. And we spend a lot of time adding the extra little bells and whistles and polish on the user interface. And we recognize that in these platforms, there's sort of a two-way street. Yes, they can charge a toll, but they can also do great things to market and distribute you. So when we were building the first version of Ness, I worked very aggressively to network with the folks at Apple. They actually have a dedicated team to working with their developers. It's called the Worldwide Developer Relations Team. And the Worldwide Developer Relations Team works with the people in App Store marketing to help feature apps in the App Store, to help pick apps that can be considered candidates for their marketing programs. And there's a bunch of folks that spend time in the Valley that you can get introduced to through investors and people in the app ecosystem. And Apple will pick a handful of companies to develop relationships with. And they really like it when developers pay a lot of attention to those details and make a user interface that has that same level of polish of the things that Cupertino builds. So we spend a lot of time on that, and we've been very fortunate to have been featured a number of times in the App Store in a variety of categories. And so for us, our focus is to really just build an outstanding product, something that people want to tell their friends about. And then, when we have a new build available, say, hey, Apple, we're releasing this thing, check it out, it's really cool, here's what it does. And they've been a great partner for us.
Thank you. So moving on to a different area, recruiting. So a young founder came to me the other day and said it's impossible to recruit in the Bay Area. Everyone wants to be a founder. Anyone good wants to be a founder. They don't want to work for you. Now, how have you, especially with engineers, how have you dealt with this? Whether you're looking for mobile engineers, JavaScript people, machine learning people, algorithms guys, whatever it is, whatever ilk of engineering specialty you're looking for in your startup to scale, how have you been able to recruit people that will come to you and stay or not have to overpay, and perhaps overpay, but at least stay? So I'm going to start with Daniel and Corey, because you guys are in kind of perhaps the most competitive areas for where engineers need to be hired in, because both of you have a lot of your business dependent on mobile, and mobile has the highest shortage of engineers right now.
Yeah, and Matt's not making anything interesting. So.
No, Matt is making something very interesting, but I think he's got some scale now.
I will say only one thing, that two of the three people joining me on the panel we have been in interesting employee competitive situations already, and we're not building solar panels.
Forgot to mention that's our alternate business plan. So,
right.
Whoops.
Yeah, we're falling back on that too, actually.
So I actually have a really interesting story on hiring, because I suspect, I don't know if this will be part of Corey's answer, that some of it will be network. But I originally came out here and I had zero network. I knew no one. I originally come from Israel, and I literally landed in the Bay Area with a suitcase and no friends, really. I didn't have college buddies. I didn't have your classic, a bunch of kids at Harvard built Facebook type of story. Coincidentally, my co-founder, Robbie, as I mentioned before, most of his friends worked at Google, which he legally couldn't hire from. He couldn't really communicate with anyone who worked at Google. So we were stuck in this weird situation where we didn't really know anyone. And we did something quite interesting, specifically because we knew we were going to be an engineering-driven company, and getting the first few engineers was tremendously important to us. We wrote this fairly simple engineering challenge that we sent out to this fairly technical website that some of you might know. It's called Hacker News. And we sent it out on a Friday, and the goal of the challenge, we crafted it from the very beginning to not necessarily be something difficult that you shouldn't be able to solve, but to be something pleasant that a good engineer could spend 25 minutes on a Friday, where they want to be out of their work anyway because their day's miserable, because they're working at some large company, and they have a nice experience at the end of it. And to date, we've seen hundreds and hundreds of resumes from this challenge, and we've hired, I believe, about 5 people from our team from across various portions of the world. We have people from Canada, we have people from France, we even have people from Austria who have just seen the challenge and been intrigued by it, and just happened to solve it. And at the very end of the challenge, we had this little thing, which is if you're interested and you found this fun and you'd like to work on more fun things, send us your resume. Even if you're not interested, send us your resume. And it turns out we had no clue this would yield such a success, but it turns out it's a really interesting way to try to leverage hiring through the internet itself. And it's been quite successful for us. I know that's not a general comprehensive answer to your question, but I feel like it's a really nifty piece of advice that a lot of companies maybe should just do. Just have really fun challenges engineers can do. So,
Corey?
So, I think it is a very challenging market right now, where we have a lot of activity in the venture capital industry. We have some companies like Google and Facebook and Apple doing very well, working on really interesting projects. So I think it is probably the most challenging thing to do in today's market. And the strategy that we've employed is really to just do everything that is possible. So we actively work our networks from universities and other companies. We engage with contingency recruiters. We have folks in-house who work with us on recruiting. 2 of them are here tonight who spend a lot of their time. Hi, Matt. Hi, Paul. So I wouldn't.
He's even giving a shout out to his recruiters.
Right.
So
I wouldn't.
It is a recruiting event.
I wouldn't say there's any one silver bullet in recruiting. In this market, really trying everything Some channels will be effective, other channels will not, and changing it up. But realizing that that is likely to be one of the most significant challenges that you face as an entrepreneur or CEO. I actually got some great advice from Peter Thiel once. I interviewed with him for a job at Founders Fund and asked him, so what takeaway or lesson would you have for a young entrepreneur? And he said, well, as a CEO, the most important use of my time was recruiting. I'd spend between 30 and 50% of my time just recruiting. And I think that advice is only even more true now in this market. So I spend a lot of my time actively involved in recruiting. We have a team of people at Nest dedicated to that. One of the interesting things that's different about today's market is you have very high degree of visibility into the talent pool. LinkedIn didn't exist in 1999, but you can buy a LinkedIn recruiter account for about $8,000 a year, where you have access to just about every engineer in Silicon Valley. And a lot of them have put fairly detailed profiles of the type of skill sets that they have on their networks. And if you spend your time networking in the Valley and adding to your database of contacts, then you'll find that you're pretty close hop away from most people in most companies in the Valley. So using that piece of technology as a very focused tool has been an effective use for us. But I'd say, there are many places that you can find talent. Try aggressively scouring all of them.
Thank you. Anything else to add? Anybody else? Matt?
I'll toss out one thing. The conversation just now really focused on sourcing and screening. And I think you're right. I think sourcing and screening, you throw the kitchen sink at it and see or beat the bush or whatever analogy you want and see how many birds fly out. The real challenge is what happens after that. The sort of definition of success. You said hiring. And to me, hiring starts with sourcing and screening, but then it's really about how do you find the winners that are going to come through the door and be a part of your family. And so we did the math, my recruiter and me. We figured that in 2011, what year is it now? 2012, right? So 2011, I did something like 275 interviews, closer to 300. And we hired a very small fraction of those and a very small fraction of people that got to see me. A very small fraction of people that came across the door got to see me. And what we do really, really aggressively is, and I've said this word already earlier, but filter for values. Try to hire people who are going to come in and instantly feel at home with people who have a shared value system. It's not that everybody loves to eat chicken or that everybody likes to wear colored socks or whatever. It's about what do you value in the people that you spend 12 to 18 hours a day with. What do you value in them? And so we have a whole system where people have to know what they're interviewing for. They have to be very rigorous in the feedback loop. No person who interviews anybody is ever allowed to talk to anybody who's going to be interviewing the person after them about what they experienced, because that taints their opinion. And only I do the personality interview, which has nothing to do with skills whatsoever, but only interviews for a person's psychological makeup. And sounds high-tech, but it's something that we sort of developed over the course of hundreds and hundreds of interviews. For me, what's most important about hiring is that you build a team that represents who you want to be, and that will ultimately attract and retain people who are like those people. And if you can do that really, really well and really meticulously and have a CEO who's willing to do 5 interviews in a row on Tuesday until 9 p.m. because he's doing 275 of those a year, that you'll find a team that starts to attract people almost naturally by word of mouth as your team grows, and it makes the sourcing and the screening way, way easier.
Yeah, well said. Moving on to a different topic. A lot of you, all of you, are hot Silicon Valley startups in the making. How do you go from sort of a local Silicon Valley hot startup to a global maximum? Have you begun to think about how you would be international? In fact, these days, most internet companies are instantly international from day one. They can't control it. So then how do you put people on the ground in these places, and how do you then proceed from there just to be able to have a local presence in a lot of different markets? But I'm going to start this question with Eden, because she was sort of international before any of these internet companies are international, because you had to go to Kenya. So do you have local employees in Kenya? How do you do this?
So I have a team of people in the village that I piloted in who, I went on the ground. I spent, like I said, 2 weeks just trying to get to know everyone, trying to figure out who was sketchy and who wasn't, and then, really figuring out who I was personally compatible with as well.
In the valley too.
Yeah. And I think so. A lot of the same things about recruiting also kind of apply in a different way when I'm looking for local partners. And so I think ultimately, when the Sun Saluter will scale, I think the best way to do it is just to trust local partners to handle all of that in their areas, because they have the expertise, they know the cultural the cultural practices in the area, and they would be better at that than I would be. So I think for me, getting to understand how this technology would be applied in different areas of the world is really important in understanding how solar installations work in general. And so I think after I do that, I would be in a better position to deploy domestically.
Matt?
Register your trademarks internationally at the beginning. I can come up with lots of little examples of things where lawyers ask you questions you don't know the answer to, and so you kind of throw out an answer. The global scale thing, if you think about it from the very beginning, we do about a third of our revenue internationally today, thanks to Apple, because they're able to deliver customers in those countries without us having to have staff on the ground. But I think it's such an immensely complex topic to think about how you roll out a business and a brand and a product into other cultural contexts, which is ultimately what it means when you go international. I had to do it with Apple when I was living in China with products there, and you don't just walk in and talk about achievement and No Child Left Behind Act in China. It doesn't work, for those of you who are thinking of doing that. You really have to understand the cultural context in which you're operating, and I think to your point, sometimes that means partnerships. We, Inkling, will do this with local teams on the ground in those countries, because we must source content that's relevant for those markets and then deliver it through our technology platform to those markets, and that's not something that's easy to do through a partner, because they don't understand us any better than we understand them. But I think the sort of thinking that if I had anything to redo in my business with respect to international growth, it would be to go back. I know it sort of sounds tactical and jokey, but I would register those trademarks internationally, because you have to deal with it down the line. You have to think about all of the decisions you make up front that have implications for your ability to be a global business later. And if you truly want to be the billion-dollar business that stands alone in IPOs, then when you're 3 people sitting in a garage for the 3 weeks that part of your company actually is in that state, you should be thinking about the outcomes that you're trying to aim for globally down the line and make decisions that are going to set you up for success in those markets later. We did that sometimes. We didn't do it enough.
Great. If there's nothing else that you guys have to add, I'll go to a new lightning round of questions. So for these questions, I would prefer very quick answers, like yes, no, or 1 or 2 words. So what's your favorite mobile app? And let's start this answer, starting with Daniel, going down to Corey. And then for the next question, I'm going to start the other way in.
My favorite mobile app, the app that I use most is Mail. That app, pretty much.
Wow, it's my least favorite mobile app.
Yeah, it's not my favorite, but it's the one I use most.
Don't judge you. Me?
Yes.
My favorite one behind Inkling is Find My Friends. That's why I had to. Find My Friends.
Find My Friends. Okay. Eden?
Sounds bad, but I don't use apps.
Well, I don't use solar.
I don't read books.
Corey?
As an entrepreneur, Dropbox. As a person that has way too many friends on Facebook, Path.
Okay, so this question, start from you and come down towards Daniel. What website do you start your day with? What's your start? Where do you start your day?
I try not to do that. I find that it is not the best use of my time, actually.
A lot of people answer Facebook to this question. So where do you start your day?
In Mail.
In Mail.
And that'll link out to websites as necessary.
Eden?
Reddit.
I start in some combination of 3 things, very rapid fire before I get to bed. The Stocks app, iTunes Connect, for prior day sales, and if I'm using mail, otherwise I go to the Gmail app and the web browser.
I would say I'm an odd case because I try to keep up on what's happening in the homeland, so some Israeli news sites, iTunes Connect, and then mail, probably.
Cool. So this is an opinion question, and I think it's just useful because there's been a lot of debate on this. So do dropouts make better founders than those that complete college? It's a controversial question, but one that's got successes both ways. You know?
This is a rapid fire answer question?
Rapid fire answer question. Yes, no, because we're just seeking your opinion without necessarily having you digress on it. Because that could be a long conversation. There is beer afterwards, I understand, somewhere. So you can go talk about it later.
I mean, do you apply 100% of the time consistently?
Well, not necessarily, but at least what's your going in
on
opinion?
average?
Yes.
On average. Oh, I'm not going to be first, so I have actually no opinion on this because
well,
I've
we'll
never
start
gone to
with
college.
Eden.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yes and no. I mean, I can't answer more, right? You said lightning round, so.
All right.
Low to no correlation between your input and your output on that question. That's my opinion.
Okay.
So there's a bunch of ways of looking at this using statistics. If you actually look at the number of people who have dropped out to start companies, you would be crazy to do that. But if you look at the value of companies that have been created by people who have dropped out of college, then it might actually be a nice correlation. That said, I will just make a plug for spending time with young, smart, motivated, intelligent people when you want to start a company. And if you do that, you are probably likely to have a higher chance of success.
Daniel?
What's college?
Okay. On that topic, so is higher education overrated? I mean, I know there's, again, on this is not necessarily a yes/no answer, but is higher education overrated? There's been a lot of discussion and debate about the cost of higher education, but is it overrated? And I'm going to start with you, Matt, since you live in this world.
How would I have, like 10 words, or would I have like a minute?
You can have longer than 10 words.
The value of higher education by Matt Mcginnis. Okay, so you go to college and you're 18, and you leave college and you're 22. And raise your hand in the audience if you did that. Okay, leave your hand up. Leave your hand up. All of you who just had your hand up, put your hands up. Put your hand down only if you feel like you left college the same person. Okay, so no, I didn't see anybody put their hands down. You didn't leave the college the same person. Sorry, the hand exercise is now over. College changes you. From 18 to 22, so much happens in terms of maturity and growth as a human being that it's difficult to deny the value of that aspect of college. If we could do a hand game, we won't. But did you learn a ton academically? I mean, I learned how to be an engineer. I learned about VLSI design. I learned about transistor state changes and the leakage of energy in a transistor, and it was fascinating. But I think for the price I paid, and I arguably paid a ridiculous price in terms of money, it wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth it for the education. I could have gotten that education if I were so motivated in very different contexts for way less money, way less money. But was being locked up with all of my drunk friends for 4 years and having my heart broken by my first love and learning to deal with the notion of competition in an academic setting and carrying that forward into my real life, was that worth it? Every penny. And I wouldn't give it up for $1 billion. So is higher education overrated? The education part might be. The human growth side of it is not. And it's a critical rite of passage for human beings at that age, in my opinion. But that's just my opinion.
Okay. Others? Anybody else care to comment on this?
I would say that it is probably underrated. It is the acquisition of knowledge that allows us to scale as individuals and to do things that the human race hasn't been done before. So I think we are better off as a society the more people who acquire the kind of knowledge that you can acquire in higher education, even if you do it on your own and teach yourself, which is what technology allows us to do. But it really will allow us to progress further forward as a society, the more people who do it. So I think it is an important thing. The more broadly we can allow people to access it.
Okay, so this question I'm going to have each of you answer, which is...
Wait, we're going to leave the higher ed question?
We're leaving the higher ed question,
Peter
unless you have
Thiel
more
elephant
comments
in
on
the
it.
room and all that stuff?
Well,
You're the moderator.
we can continue on. It's a long topic on higher education, and I think there's clearly you spoke eloquently about it and the importance of college, and I think Eden spoke about it at the very beginning when she was making her opening remarks that she will go back and complete. And I think Corey added to it. And Daniel, unless you have anything else to say, I'm going to move to the next question.
I appreciate that.
Which is share with this audience one mistake that you made in the young lives of your companies in business that you would care for others not to have to repeat. So share with them a learning that you hope they don't have to repeat. So it's useful to everybody. And I'm going to let whoever has an immediate mistake. And in the scheme of mistakes, I'd like to pick on the bigger mistakes, because I think there's a multiplier effect in mistakes. You know, the early mistakes can sometimes be much more costly than smaller mistakes that you make later in the life of your businesses. So whoever has one glaring mistake already in their mind that they want to talk about, go first.
Never argue with Ram Shriram on stage.
Is that your mistake?
I got a real one too. I just felt like I just spoke. So
go for your real one.
Mine is hire slowly, but don't hesitate to fire quickly. Do not let employees who are not working out linger. I mean, to an entrepreneur coming into it, if you're not an experienced people manager, that is the single most painful thing you can do, because it hurts culture. It drags everyone down. And there's this super hyper craze. You said earlier that to be successful, the words that you chose, I liked them a lot. It was you have to have emotional stability or emotional stamina or whatever. You make decisions often emotionally, and not firing someone is so much easier an emotional decision every day than the decision to fire someone. So the advice that I give folks who come after me and sort of in their first managerial role as a CEO is, if you really think you have to fire someone, fire them as fast as possible and move on, because the rest of the team is counting on you to do it. And I didn't do that once, and it was a mistake, and it's one of the most painful ones that I regret the most.
I'd actually just like to echo that as well. I think it's one of those things that you read about and everybody says, yeah, this is a mistake that I made, but it is a very real one, and it's one that can have a big effect on the entrepreneur and the founding team as individuals as well. And you probably won't learn that one until you actually go through it, but it is probably the best advice that I could give an entrepreneur that's staffing up an organization.
Well, I think that whole year I mentioned before of sophomore year, where I just sat there and no progress was made on my company, no progress was made on the technology. I didn't really prototype anything because I was just miserable in class. If I could go back and defer sophomore year until after my Thiel fellowship and have been doing this right after my project in Kenya, I would have done that.
So you felt like you lost a year there.
I lost a year there.
Daniel?
I guess just to speak to the hiring thing, because it's a really interesting theme that seems to come up whenever you ask any entrepreneur, like, okay, so like, what's the one big thing you regret? I didn't fire fast enough. And now the interesting question is, like, I think we all think there was some other founder who sat on some other panel and was asked the same exact question, and he also said, oh, you should just fire, like, so why didn't we see that? Yeah. Now, of course, the interesting question is, like, as humans, why do we screw this up all the time? Why are we, like, not able to make the correct decision? Because I think answering that question will actually yield the key to, like, how do you, without making this mistake, understand that hiring slowly and firing quickly is important. And it's a fairly complex answer. But that would be, I guess, as in general, I think, like, trying to figure out the theme in, like, a series of mistakes that everyone seems to make, and, like, understand that those people knew that they shouldn't make those mistakes, but they still did. So there must be something that we're not wired for. I mean, I feel like, again, just like, it's the second, there's something in your brain which does, pattern recognition that just has figured out that this person's not working out. And then what you're trying now to do is you're going to spend, like, the next month convincing yourself emotionally, because, like, part of you it's emotionally painful, and you have this fear that you're going to hurt the team if you fire someone. That you're going to dislodge this, like, piece. Everything's going to crumble. Everyone's going to go home crying. And now you have to, like, buy Prozac for everyone, and it's super expensive. But it turns out, and I think this is what happens to people after you actually fire someone, everyone's kind of relieved at the end. And it's amazing how like we're not able to anticipate that. And I guess I try to think a lot about, what are other things that like humanity keeps on making the same, repeated mistake over and over. And we're like, oh, don't hire people. Great. Tell the next generation, make sure when you fire people, you're good at that. And then like it continues to go on and on and on for thousands. God knows, maybe Moses was like wanted to fire someone. So it's just, I guess it's an interesting theme to explore. But yeah, I mean, if I had to say one thing, it's just like once you have that realization that someone has to go, someone has to go.
Yeah, I'll add one little thing, which is this is not a mistake as much as it is a learning, which is the advice you get from people who came before you tends to be right. And it's very hard to realize when you're in circumstances where you can effectively apply that advice until it's too late.
Yeah.
And
then you're another advice giver, like the rest
exactly,
of them.
right?
Yeah.
And it's terrible. So what I try to do is realizing that I can't be perfect at taking advice, and you shouldn't always, of course, take advice. Advice is free, so it's not worth much. But when I actively seek out examples of things that I've heard a few times from people I trust, I've sought out mentors who tell me good things, whom I trust, and then I look for chances to apply that advice actively, and then I might have a fighting chance of avoiding one big mistake by virtue of having taken somebody's advice on purpose.
Excellent. So on the subject of raising money and the capital structures of your businesses, do you have a view into how you would think about that with respect to making sure that you've got enough left for employees and being able to scale your businesses, and especially if you're trying to be thinking outsized ambition here, you want to have enough equity in the pool that's available for all the growth that is yet to come. So as you think through that, is there anything you'd like to share, not in the spirit of talking about mistakes as much as thinking about capital structures that lead to success?
So I'd like to jump on that one. Coming from the venture capital business, I spent a lot of time with VCs, and a lot of VCs out there are not great people. They're not in the business for doing what they're doing for the same reasons that entrepreneurs are. As entrepreneurs, most people are there to go and create things that are in their head and execute on their vision. Many venture capitalists exist to make money for their limited partners and to maximize that investment. And I think when you choose your investors, just like when you recruit your team, you want to have people that have a shared sense of value, a shared sense of vision. It is so critical and important to recruit your investors in the same way and to make sure that you have that shared understanding for how you're going to develop your business. In this market today, it has never been so entrepreneur friendly. You have your pick of investors to work with. So I would say rather than optimizing for things like deal terms or valuation or capital structure, make sure that you're getting into a relationship that you feel comfortable with, that will scale and grow with you through time.
Anybody else?
CV.
Or you wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole? This question. Corey, you were brave. That's good. Okay, keep going.
I was going to say a really nifty thing that I feel like we've been able to do in the past few years that was not always possible, especially during the 90s and the early thousands, is just like the cost of running infrastructure is so cheap at this point. And we're able, to run like an infrastructure with, a few hundred machines, thousands of hard drives, and God knows how much that would have cost us back in the days where Google was getting started. We didn't have to we didn't have to leave our office. Like we could just call someone up at Amazon and say, hey, it seems like users in Japan just discovered us. We need another 50 machines. Thanks. Goodbye. Instead of
set up your own
cage. Fly people down to find what did Google do? They had shipping containers somewhere.
You had to set up cages and connect them to the network.
And use your hands? What? That's weird. You don't have to do that today, and it's much cheaper. And as a result, you're sort of able to progress further along, validating your vision, which in turn will lead you to be able to raise capital on more favorable terms because you're actually able to build a lot of this stuff. And I'm actually quite excited about seeing that get even cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And with a lot of things that Amazon has been doing lately, actually, you really reach a point where you could build infrastructure that would support tremendous products that would arguably maybe take $40 million to build in 1999. You could just do by literally clicking 4 buttons. I'm kind of excited to see what products that yields. I would bet that it would yield better, more refined products because you're able to build and succeed or fail faster.
So one final short question, and then I'm going to turn it over to the VLab organizers for further information about future programs. If you weren't doing your startup that you're doing now, what else would you be doing?
A startup.
Well, okay. If you weren't doing your company right now.
Okay.
Are you ruling out startups as a whole,
Right.
like as a field?
No. If you weren't doing your
Okay.
particular company.
What other startup
You get to
might
pick
be
another
doing?
startup.
Or what else would you be doing with your life?
I see.
It doesn't have to be another startup.
That's such a funny question. I never considered myself outside of this context, ever.
I will let you think if you want while I
Yeah, you go ahead.
because I have a really easy answer. I would have had an alternate life, which arguably might have been more interesting in the Israeli intelligence had I not been doing a startup now. I decided at the very last minute to try to do a startup because I realized that one path was a 6-year commitment to training and to arguably doing very important and interesting work. And startup didn't really have, turns out it actually does have an infinite year commitment because you basically enslave yourself. But I didn't know that at the time, so I was gullible. But that's what I would be doing. And I hope you have an answer by now.
Well, if you don't, we can have
I would just be doing another startup. And if I couldn't do it here because I didn't have my green card, I'd be in Canada doing it. And if that's kind of, I don't know, it's so core to who I am. I think that's still what I'd be doing.
A lot of engineers available in Waterloo.
They're all being flown out to Inkling for interviews.
So I have sort of two answers. I think one interesting observation of the markets today is that we're in kind of a winner-take-all type economy. And if you look at what Google and Apple and Facebook have done, really some of the greatest talent in Silicon Valley exists inside of those companies. And as someone that's excited about building really incredible products that when consumers see it say, oh my gosh, that feels like magic, I think there's a lot of opportunity in those companies to do things that had never been done before. Now that said, I think on the fringes of technology, there are certain areas in applied robotics, in artificial intelligence, at the intersection of large-scale data and genetics that create a lot of interesting entrepreneurial activities. So if I were to wear my entrepreneur hat, I'd go and try to start a company in one of those areas. If I wanted to build a consumer product, I'd think long and hard about doing it inside a larger company.
Eden gets the last word.
Well, I might be in college, but chances are probably not. I mean, like most of us,
You'd go back and do your sophomore year again.
I could. Yeah. I have a stack of ideas written in a notebook somewhere. Maybe if it wasn't the Sun Saluter, I'd be doing something else. But I'm probably still be doing what I'm doing right now.
Wonderful. I want to thank all of our panelists who've been wonderful tonight.